How's it going, guys? So today we're going to be going over bone structure. In this video we're going to be using just a typical long bone. I think this one is more representative of the femur bone, but it's a pretty good example of a bone and easy to go into the structure of the bone, the different parts, and really illustrate the important aspects to remember. So in this cover photo we have here, we have the whole bone, points to everything. You have your epiphysis over here, your metaphysis, diaphysis, articular cartilage, periosteum, endosteum, your yellow bone marrow here, spongy bone, compact bone, all the good stuff. So we'll get into those separately. So first part to know is really the different regions of the bone. You can see here you have your epiphysis, as you can see in this picture. This would be your region here. Then your metaphysis, which we'll get into the next one, is there, and then your diaphysis, and then it just repeats down here, your metaphysis, and then your epiphysis. So your epiphysis is essentially the wide ends of the bone. They typically contain spongy bone, which incorporates red bone marrow into the spaces. If you remember correctly, red bone marrow is where hematopoiesis occurs, which, if you remember correctly, was the production of blood cells that includes red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So and the epiphysis is found at both the proximal and distal ends of the bones. So you have your distal epiphysis here, your proximal epiphysis there. The region that connects your epiphysis to your diaphysis is known as the metaphysis. As I kind of explained in that past slide, your metaphysis is this region right here and this region right here. There is a proximal and distal, metaphysis as well. Those terms really aren't really used when it comes to metaphysis. That's more so for the epiphysis, just because metaphysis is, less commonly used, but it is important. And the metaphysis is also the region that contains the epiphyseal plate. Your epiphyseal plate is what enables your bone to grow as you get older, and over time it transforms into something else once growth has stopped within the body. Alright, here we have the diaphysis. Your diaphysis is essentially the shaft of the bone, the long, more narrow part. And it connects the proximal epiphysis and metaphysis to the distal metaphysis and epiphysis. The diaphysis holds the medullary cavity and the yellow bone marrow. So your medullary cavity is this opening all right here. And as you see here, this is your yellow bone marrow right here. If you remember correctly, your yellow bone marrow is where your fats are stored. And that's going to be right there in the diaphysis. There's also some other stuff in there in the medullary cavity, but the most important thing to know is where that's where the yellow bone marrow is stored in the bone. Like I just said, the epiphyseal line is osseous tissue that replaced the epiphyseal plate, which is the growth plate of hyaline cartilage. I don't know what happened there. So, as you get older, your epiphyseal plate, gets longer. You can grow, and then when you get to the point where your height has stopped growing and you're kind of plateauing for the rest of your life, that epiphyseal plate is replaced, which is made of hyaline cartilage. That plate is replaced with osseous tissue, which is bone tissue. And that term epiphyseal plate transforms into epiphyseal line, and that's this line right there. kind of separating that gap there in between the what looks like the spongy bone, red bone marrow. Then you have your articular cartilage. This is a layer of cartilage on each ends of the epiphysis. They serve to reduce friction and act as a shock absorber. So you see here your proximal epiphysis. This is on like the sort of like ball of the bone, which is going to go into your hip socket to form the joint. But you see your articular cartilage here, and then on your distal epiphysis you have your articular cartilage here. Like I said, these both reduce friction, act as a shock absorber, and they're made of cartilage, which is more flexible and better for movement, shock absorption, friction reduction, as compared to your osseous tissue, your bone tissue, just regular bone. Serves to preserve the bone and give it a longer life. Next up we have the endosteum. So your endosteum is a membranous lining of the medullary cavity where bone growth and repair occurs. Once again, we covered the medullary cavity earlier. That's this right here. And then your medullary cavity is also where the yellow bone marrow is. So if you know your prefixes well, the endosteum, based off the prefix endo is inner. Opposite to that is the periosteum, which we're about to cover, but that's more of an outer lining. But if you're ever confused between the two, you can always, if you have that knowledge of anatomical prefixes, you can look at the prefix endo. Endo means inner. Inner. Remember that. You'll always remember what the endosteum is in this diagram of a bone as compared to periosteum if you were asked to find the difference. And like I just said, periosteum is going to be covering the outer surface of the bone. Contains the Haversian canal, which is pretty important, and I think we'll cover in another video. And the periosteum also serves as an attachment point for tendons and ligaments. Tendons and ligaments are very important for movement. Remember, tendons is muscle to bone, and ligaments is bone to bone connection. Also another important aspect. I think that is the last one, yeah, so we'll get in here to the quiz questions and go over those real quick. Alright, so for these quizzes here, there were 6 questions, all pretty much identifying locations in the bone, so we'll get right into them here. Alright, what part of the bone is this? So we can see here that this is pointing to this little covering right here. I don't know if you guys can see that good enough, but there's like a little kind of flap going backwards. Anyways, so we should be able to determine from that is like an outer layer, outer covering of the shaft of the bone. So articular cartilage is going to be at the proximal epiphysis and distal epiphysis, so it's not that, so we can cross that out. Metaphysis, that's this region right here that connects the epiphysis to the diaphysis, so it's not that. So between endosteum and periosteum. Now if you remember the trick that I gave you guys for remembering the difference between endosteum and periosteum is looking at the prefixes. If you guys know your anatomical prefixes, this is a really, really easy question. Endo is inner. Perio is pretty much outer. Right, so if this right here picture is showing the outer covering, then it's not going to be endosteum, it's going to be periosteum. Alright, pretty easy there. Alright, so what is this pointing to here? So we have this and this, it's pointing to this region. Alright, regions of the bone. If we remember correctly, there's 3. There is epiphysis, diaphysis, and metaphysis. So you know it's not going to be your endosteum. You remember your diaphysis is going to be your shaft of the bone, and the metaphysis is going to be this middle part that connects the two. Right, so it's going to be your epiphysis. Remember, there's the proximal and the distal one. Alright, so here, this kind of looks like it's pointing to a bone marrow. So we can rule out the nutrient artery, and we can rule out the metaphysis. Alright, so based off the color, you should be able to determine that this is a yellow bone marrow. But let's say it didn't have a color, and you just knew that it was bone marrow. Based off its location, would you be able to deem if it was red or yellow? Now, if you remember correctly, red bone marrow is in the spongy bone of the epiphysis. Either the proximal or distal one, doesn't matter. Your yellow bone marrow is what's going to be found in the shaft of your bone, the diaphysis. So this, question mark right here is pointing to the shaft of the bone, so you should be able to determine that it's the yellow bone marrow. Alright, so here we have, it looks like it's pointing to this line right here. So I know it's kind of close, but it's not directly pointing to spongy bone, and it's not directly pointing to red bone marrow, but I could have seen the confusion, so that's why I didn't put those options up here. So let's look at the options. We have the medullary cavity. Remember, that's going to be in your diaphysis. Periosteum, endosteum. Remember, those are your coverings, your layers, whether it's inner or outer, so won't be those. So it has to be your epiphyseal line. Remember, that line is what replaces the epiphyseal plate after you're done growing. Alright, so here it looks like we're pointing to this grayish area on the proximal and distal ends of the bone. So you're not going to be your endosteum. Remember, that's a inner covering, not an outer one. Metaphysis is going to be your region right here that connects the epiphysis and your diaphysis. Epiphyseal line, it's going to be your line right there. Do you remember what the functions are for your articular cartilage? To lower friction and reduce shock. Makes it easier on the bone if you ever have something happen to you. Here we go, another region of the bone. These 3 right here, the regions, you should know like the back of your hand. Someone gives you a bone and asks you to identify where the diaphysis is, you should be able to do it right here. Remember, that's your shaft of the bone. Your epiphysis is going to be here and here. And then remember, your metaphysis is going to be here, here, and periosteum is one of those outer layers, so oops, you don't even have to think about that. Alright, that's pretty much it. Bone structure, kind of more complicated thing for what we have gone over so far, but still, not too hard of a concept. Just study it, you'll get it. Put in enough time, you'll understand it. It's not about how smart you are, it's about how much work you put in, okay? Just remember that. Till next time, later.